Hi there, this is John,
Hey, this is Hugo.
and we are collaborating on something called OneManStartups, but we wanted to talk about some self-hosting stuff, didn't we, Hugo?
We did. We want to actually install Mattermost in a self-hosted server in order to reduce costs and to have better control into how we do Slack-like functions.
And so, yeah, if people aren't familiar, so Mattermost is something like a Slack competitor, and they're what I would call an open core system, meaning that there are some premium features that you have to pay for a smaller startup like us, and we're running pulso.ai for those who don't know. It is nice to be able to onboard hundreds of employees potentially without having to pay how much does Slack cost, Hugo, these days?
725 you pay yearly, 825 per month if you pay monthly per user.
So yeah, it may not be the most expensive SaaS in the world, but it adds up along with a lot of other stuff you have to pay for as a business. And these days where interest rates are no longer zero, we all have to be a little bit more cost conscious and focus on building real businesses. So yeah, we thought that we would go through a little plan with you all, showing what we did, and then we'll just show the final product and talk more broadly about how self-hosting fits into this new philosophy that not really new, right?
No, it's not new. This is the way it have always been. You have software, you install it in your infrastructure, whether your infrastructure is some hosting provider or somewhere else, and then you run it, and sometimes you pay for it. But the reality is this idea where everything is so abstracted that you have to pay for every single thing by the seat has really gone out of control. And even the smallest companies have to spend tens of thousands of dollars every month to just maintain their SaaS presence and all the tools they need to work. Between Jira and Slack and everything else, it adds up fairly quickly for a company of 50 people.
Yeah, and I think it ties very naturally into this whole. I would almost characterize it like an allergic reaction, right? Like I think that DevOps and frameworks have gotten so absurdly complicated relative to what we need to do over the last, say 5 years, especially, that you're just seeing a movement towards, not just not being serverless. On the contrary, like how can I control more of my servers myself? And so this is more of a SaaS offering. It's sort of like replacing a function that you might pay for on a monthly basis. But I think in some future episodes, we'll probably talk about how to move some of your own, if not infrastructure, at least your code into a place where you can control it more completely.
Yeah, we are very much no SaaS, yes PaaS. Platform as a service is great. Software as a service is much harder to justify, particularly if you are a technical team that can easily do this. Do not go out and pay for things that you can do yourself for very little investment. You will see how quickly we set all this up.
Yeah. Well, look, let's switch over to the little plan, the outline that we put together. And so if people don't know, I think this is a good practice. Like if you're collaborating with somebody, well, if you are collaborating with somebody, you probably should be. And if you are, it's always a good idea to have a plan, right? And so Hugo and I put together this rough outline of how we wanted to migrate the company to Mattermost. So I think in a broad sense, there were two pieces to this. The first is, just setting up a server, installing Mattermost, like all of that, and then there was the data migration.
Yep. And we're going to use Hetzner, which is a server provider. It's basically a bare bones, much, much cheaper AWS that only gives you nodes. And you could do this with AWS. You could do this with pretty much anything. We use that because it's super cheap and it's very, very easy to use.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a huge fan of Hetzner. For those who don't know, it's Hetzner.com. I'll try to remember to leave a link in the description. But the basic idea, it's like European EC2, right? And so they have data centers in Finland and Germany. They have a couple of locations in North America as well. And you can just very cheaply get a virtual server, pretty high performance and all that. And it's like super cheap. And especially if your use case can tolerate some latency by living in Finland, which is, on the order of say like 200 milliseconds of latency. It's not crazy bad. You can get ARM instances, which are actually even cheaper. And offhand, I think it's something like 16 cores, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and you're talking like 20 something dollars a month to rent that. I mean, I don't know of too many startups that will outgrow that in a really fast period of time.
Yeah, and our hypothesis here is that we're gonna set up our own instance and we're gonna put everything that we run into it, being Mattermost, being WordPress, being all these tools that we use to do what we do every day, and see if we can get away with paying very, very little to support our wide of tools that we use on a day-to-day basis. So let's talk about the plan here.
Yeah, so the steps here are pretty straightforward. So we bootstrapped an Ubuntu server with Hetzner. Ubuntu specifically, like normally I prefer Debian, but we used Ubuntu here because that's what's compatible with the Omnibus installer for Mattermost. Omnibus just meaning that it installs itself and any dependencies it has, which is like Postgres offhand. So then we
And
took
we're
an export. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're gonna export all our data from Slack that we have currently. Now we're not gonna export our private conversations because in order to do that, you have to contact Slack and they have to give you that. And we realized that wasn't that important for our private conversations to also be exported.
Yeah. And the truth is, in our case, we didn't have that long or frankly that important a history in Slack anyway. But so there's some other housekeeping like configuring DNS. That's pretty straightforward, pretty generic. And then we just need to import our Slack configuration, everything else via some CLI tooling that Mattermost provides. And so we also had a couple of TBDs here. We investigated Google SSO and the notifications for iOS. And Hugo, why don't you tell us how that turned out?
Yeah, so for Google SSO, unfortunately, the free self-hosted plan does not support it, which means that if you want to have Google SSO or any OAuth provider give you login to the tool, you have to pay for the premium version. That is fair. That is how they make money. So for us, we are willing to live with the problem of everybody having to maintain their password and Mattermost, not the end of the world. And the notifications is the same thing. If you want to use their own notifications for iOS and Android, you do have to pay for it. Now, if you want to do it yourself, you can set up your own proxy and do your own notifications through your own server. So we could also do that. So in this particular case, you can actually do notifications yourself. So, but there's no way you can do SSO and OAuth yourself without paying.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, the other thing that's beautiful about this too is that at the end of the day, you just have a Postgres database. You can do a PG dump and get all this data out of there. I mean, it's kind of a stretch to think that somebody wants to ETL this stuff and run analytics, but in theory, you could, right? Like, I think that's the beautiful thing about self-hosting is that your data is your data.
Yeah, but the beauty of having it all in your database is because as LLMs and the context that you can put on LLMs becomes bigger and bigger, you will come to like Backspace, like Gemini, what they just announced. It comes to a point where you can just put all the data that your organization generates into the context of an LLM and ask it questions. And your Slacks are a massive part of your knowledge base. So here you can just export everything as a dump from your Postgres database, hey, put this in the LM as part of the context to ask your questions against, and off you go. It is right there. Now, if you have to do that with Slack, it's significantly more complex, and private messages cannot be put there, etc., etc., etc. Now, there are privacy considerations here for sure, but for smaller organizations, you can be nimble, move fast, and actually have your knowledge base already somewhere else very easily.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. I mean, I just think that somebody once likened data to oil. And, it's one of those things where even if you don't use it today, it's nice to know it's in the ground and you can pull it out tomorrow. So, yeah, always good to have that under your control at your fingertips, let's say. So why don't we switch over and take a look at the finished product here? So um, let's see.
It is Mattermost of pulso.ai.
Yeah, so you guys can see here that we have our Mattermost.pulso.ai. So pulso.ai is the broader domain TLD for the product that we're building. And yeah, this is the first of our services that we've migrated from being SaaS to being self-hosted. But we have a small server running on Hetzner that's powering all of this. And, we got all of our data in and everything else. And, seems to work great so far.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, everything seems to work just well. So why don't we show them the Hetzner, the Qualify dashboards? Why don't we show them how the server is configured and what we have to do to import everything?
Yeah, let's do that. This is going to be the part of the video I have to edit the most for personal info, but that's fine. So switch over here, bring up my Hetzner. Why don't you tell us about what's going on in your life, Hugo?
I am obsessed with creating the perfect Zoom background with DALI. So this is a time travel related Zoom background that I have been perfecting the prompt over way too much time. I'm just saying, we all need hobbies.
Well, it is beautiful. I was almost going to comment on it before I got frustrated with our recording difficulties, but
So that's what I have been up to. That and writing some code, managing teams, same old same.
and yeah, for those who don't know, this is what Hetzner looks like. So you have a little command center here where you can set things up. Like I said, I usually prefer, like for my apps and stuff, to use Debian for most things. Hugo, can you guess why?
Well, I do not know. Tell us why.
Well, Debian is this ultra stable Linux distro. It's actually the base for Ubuntu. And, the same things that have historically made people not use it for Linux desktop, all, 12 of them or whatever, is the same reason why it's great for servers. And that is it's extremely stable. And so I forget exactly how often, but their releases are not that frequent. It's basically just security patches and, everything else just stays the same and it works great. But what's cool about it is, in essence, we'll talk about this more in future videos, probably, but we have sort of this, you can almost think of it like a hybrid, right? So we have our base layer, which is Debian, ultra stable. The server maintenance is very low on that. And then on top of it, of course, like we're running most of our stuff in Docker, and Docker can pull in whatever modern dependencies it needs. So, for example, you could have a version of Node that's several years out of date on the base machine, which doesn't matter if you're using Node 20 or whatever inside your Docker image. Um,
Yeah.
and then you also have a choice of region. Like these are not as geographically dispersed as something like EC2 or even DigitalOcean. But you have some good options here. If EU data privacy is a concern for you, you have choices of some pretty good jurisdictions. And Hetzner is on the record too as saying that basically they won't do anything without a court order from a European judge. So it's not like the US where it's like, oh, some law enforcement agency asks for your user's data and they just hand it over, which for me is actually kind of an important thing. So yeah, apart from that, you're just setting up basic stuff for a server. In some regions, you can get ARM, like I think I mentioned before, and that saves you some money. But yeah, just to illustrate that, like you can get all the way out here to a 16 core, 32 gig machine for 24 euros, which is just about $24 a month right now. Which I don't know, just back of the envelope, Hugo, how far do you think you could get with one node that's of this caliber?
Well, it depends what you're doing, right? But let's say, for example, that you're trying to figure it out, you're serving some sort of web application. We're talking about easily, and we're talking easily between 30 and 50 requests per second that you are going to be able to serve that way. That is a massive application. If you actually develop something and you're starting to see that level of traffic, you're being successful. It's a good problem to have. But on
Yeah.
most lists, you will be more than enough with much cheaper nodes that you can just set up and run and have complete control.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
absolutely right.
and compare this if you were to just set up, oh, I'm gonna do ECS and AWS. I'm gonna set up my Docker images and I'm gonna let it scale and contract and do everything that comes with that. You have to ask yourself, are you actually paying less? Most likely you're paying about an order of magnitude more to handle that level of traffic. And second, is it actually simpler? Because the one thing about this is really simple. You need HA, you put two of this, and you have a load balancer, and off you go. Or three of those, and you calculate what load they have to have in order to maintain the type of SLA that you need. So it's very much to the bone, and you understand exactly what is going on. You know where all the logs are. You know what is happening in your servers at all time. Do you know that with your AWS infrastructure, with with ECES or with Azure or with Google Cloud, which is even more abstracted? Do you really know how things are running? That's something you need to ask yourself. And again, there's a trade-off here. This is a significantly more technical option on setting everything up yourself, but you did set everything up yourself. You know how everything works, and you know how to debug things when things go wrong.
Yeah, it's very true. It's also worth noting too, Hetzner has support for load balancers and multi-instances and stuff like that. So I actually think you could get pretty far. I mean, you could imagine having a primary, a replica, all of that stuff. And, gosh, I mean, I've seen the reverse so much more commonly where, there's a team of 4 engineers. Invariably, it seems like they came from Google, but they have to set up Kubernetes out of the gate. And they build the most intricate system that's capable of handling millions of requests per second, and they have no customers.
Yeah, and the reality is that everything that you today see in the AWS is optimized for enormous amounts of traffic. How are you going to handle enormous amounts of traffic? How are you going to scale and use elasticity to manage your codes for a lot of traffic? For most applications, that is not necessary. For most applications, you are handling a few customers, you are finding a few thousand. If you're a consumer app, you're handling a few thousand customers per node at the most. You are not doing that much when it comes to traffic. And that very sophisticated architectures that you can set up in AWS, in Google Cloud, in Azure, are just not necessary. And don't even get me started on Lambda. Lambda is just you giving money to Amazon. It doesn't matter how many credits they give you. You're going to use them only in 2 months.
Yep. Yep. But yeah, Hetzner is very capable. If you need more storage, you can add volumes, you can do firewalls, you can do something approximating a VPC by having private networks such that your instances can talk to each other internally instead of having to cross the public network. And also Cloud init. So I have a Cloud init script that I use for my machines, and it just ensures that stuff gets set up the same way. Think of it as sort of a poor man's Ansible or Terraform or something like that. And at small scale, it works just fine. Now, of course, if I needed to provision these things automatically, I would set up something a little bit more sophisticated, but for the right tool for the job, let's say.
Awesome. So we created our server. Can we take a look at our server, John?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Here we are. So you can see here too, we have very cheap daily backups enabled just as a hedge against any sort of data loss. Of course, you can have redundant backups too. And this is what it's costing us. So we have a small instance here, about $4 a month we're paying all in. And, we have a Slack equivalent that can scale probably to hundreds of employees, if not further.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Very, very easy. Like, can we take a look at what load we're using on this machine by any chance? It
What's,
probably doesn't even register right on the graph, the load that we have right now on this, right?
yeah, it's got to be crazy low.
Yeah, it barely registers. As you can see, with what we are using right now, it barely moves the needle. We can probably grow 10x in our Mattermost usage, and this will still work.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you can see here that we're not even coming close to pegging a CPU. It's like 1%, pretty stable. I mean, it would take us a lot of growth to the point earlier, like we would be having success problems if we managed to outgrow the server.
Yeah, and this again, this is $3 and 10x. We are basically right now paying uh 10 times less than what we will pay Slack to do this. And as we grow, we will get all the way to the point that we're paying 100 times less than we will pay Slack to do the same thing.
Yeah. So I think the question you have to ask yourself is, do you care so much about putting the onus on somebody else that you're unwilling to learn Linux for, let's say a week? And it's a one-time investment, and then you have all the knowledge that you need, basically, to start doing projects like this.
Yeah. And again, it might not be for you. It might be that you are at a point where your team simply doesn't have the skill set and you're not willing to learn it. And that's fine. But for most people that actually can get projects off the ground, this is not difficult to learn. You will actually figure this out fairly quickly, how to set all this up. And more important, you will know how your infrastructure works. As we keep moving forward in the series of videos, you will see how we also set up many of our things exactly this way with very small nodes. We have a very easy, clear define sharding strategy for our traffic, and we know where problems are, where they happen, etc. Because we know where they are. We put them there on that server. We know where to go look. There is no mystery about anything that happens in our infrastructure.
Yeah, and I mean, I just find that, it's like a lot of accelerants in your business. So I mean, to be clear, like I think differentiating between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, like Hetzner is infrastructure as a service, and I'm a huge fan because the markup on what that server would actually cost you is very low. So I think that's actually a perfectly fair trade. Where I start having a few more issues is more pass, where after a certain point, you start having to write your application in the pass way as opposed to the way that makes sense for your domain.
Yeah, for sure. I think I even say what I'm aiming for is infrastructure as a service. What I'm really for, not platform as a service or software as a service, or things that I just they really bind you into a particular system that is going to be very difficult to migrate from too. Even if you say, "Oh, I'm only using containers," you will start using containers in a very specific way to your past. Like you will start doing things the in the easiest possible way to deploy to the platform that you want to deploy. And if you ever need to move things, or if there's something that doesn't work and you don't understand how it works, the ability to say, "Yep, I will just put this somewhere else and see what happens," is not there anymore. You always keep that on.
Mhm.
But we have been rambling about one of our favorite subjects for way too long. So let's go into the server and let's show how easy it
Yeah,
is to do.
ramble a little bit more while I get it ready for presentation here.
I can ramble about this all day, but
I know you can.
cannot emphasize this enough. If
So you
we
want to
are,
look at the Coolify orchestration stuff or what?
yeah, let's look at the cool. No, let's look at the server. I mean, let's just send SSH into the server. Let's show everybody how easy it was to really install this.
Yeah, okay. We can do
And if you're wondering why we're not installing in real time, because we did all this in real time and we messed up the video.
that. These things
Mistakes
happen.
were made.
Mistakes were made.
We messed up the video, so we are re-recording the video. Very cooking show of us.
There we go. What should we check out, Hugo?
So do you still have the files that where we downloaded the omnibus and how that worked?
Yeah,
There we go.
so yeah. Why don't you talk people through it?
So this is very simple. Like the Mattermost bulk import, those are the Slack uh, exports that we did. And then we transformed those. We installed a very simple app in our Slack instance, and we use that to download some extra data. And then Mattermost actually provides a tool to be able to export that in a way that it can very, very easily. And there is a tool, is MMETL, that it allows you to very easily import that in your installation. So that was very easy.
Wait, it wasn't MMETL, it was something MMCTL, I think it was.
And CTL, yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Yeah, that was a tool that we used to actually import everything. It was very easy to do. We can actually just copy our Notion file into the description of the video, so you just know what we look in order to do this. So we imported all the data, all our public channels, our public discussions were there the moment we did that. Then after we run the omnibus installation, which was actually pretty easy to do, right? We didn't have to do much to run the omnibus, did we?
No.
Yeah, I don't see it there anymore, right? Did we put it somewhere else?
That ended up in one of the system directories, etc something.
Yeah, that's an assistant director. It was just a very simple script that you run. We got everything up and running. We did struggle a little bit with the permissions, like it's very common with Linux. We had to give it to the right directories to the right user. You can run everything as sudo. So, that's part of setting all this stuff up. But once we got past that, it was smooth sailing. After we got this up and running, we set up our DNS. And if you can show that, John, too, super easy with Cloudflare.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's super straightforward. You just go in and you add a subdomain, a record. That's it.
Yeah, we did that. And after we did that, we basically had it up and running in as a web. And then you download the app and you point it to our particular instance of Mattermost and you have the apps running. There are two things that we didn't do yet. The first one is SSO or auth. We wanted to use Google as our authentication mechanism for this. We were able to set it up and get it up and running, but you could only do that by going into the trial enterprise offer of the software, which we didn't want to do. We didn't want to pay the $10 or so a month per user that you need to do that. So for us, the trade-off of, okay, everybody will have to remember the Mattermost password, it was worth it. And the other thing that we haven't set up yet is notifications, because we need to set it up in our own server. And although it is important to have notifications on your phone, if you're doing this on the browser, or you already will see the browser notifications very easily. So again, we didn't set up because we didn't consider critical right away. So that's where we are with it.
Yeah. So, what do you think are the biggest takeaways from this exercise?
The biggest takeaways from this exercise. Well, the first one is the whole thing from start to finish, from like, hey, we wrote the Notion doc to we were completely done with it, took us about an hour and 40 minutes. And 40 minutes of that I was just trying to figure out permissions on how to give the Mattermost users the right permissions for the files that it needed. So if you're better at Linux than we are, it probably will take you significantly less time. The other thing that took us a little bit to figure out was the SSO. We tried to figure out exactly how to get it to run, and whether, although we were self-hosted, we'll still have to have the license version of it. And yes, we, at the end of the day, we realized that we couldn't just self-host SSO, and that's fair for Mattermost to do. I mean, they do have to make money somehow. And the one part that we didn't tackle yet, because we just don't see it as urgent, is notifications, because we are cool with browser notifications, so just using it in the browser for now. And you can always look it up in your phone, no problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm always just astonished by how easy stuff is nowadays, relatively speaking. Like, again, if you're willing to invest that week in learning Linux, stuff like how to use chown and, what groups mean and stuff like that, it's amazing how far you can get in just that feeling of empowerment, I think, of, when something comes up, A, I have a good idea of what it means, or B, I don't, but I understand what the process looks like to investigate, where to look, all of that, and fundamentally I have the power to figure it out.
So yeah, we definitely give doing self-hosted Mattermost a shot. Try to really go back to the bare metal. You have a node that you log into, that you install stuff into, that you configure yourself, and see how easy it really is. And if you have been doing this for a while, you used to do this, and it will come back to you fairly quickly. And if you have never done it before, read a little bit about it, and you will figure out that this is actually not that hard, and that it gives you such a better understanding of how things run.
That is, yeah, I agree with all of that actually. So
Also,
cool. I hope everybody enjoyed this video. We had a lot of fun putting it together, actually. A couple of stops and starts, but we got there. And yeah, I look forward to coming back and talking about some other topics that are near and dear to our heart. There should be some spicy takes.
excellent. Thank you, guys. What will be our next video, John? We have a couple of ideas next. We
Yeah,
want
so
to put.
we could talk about the overcomplication of DevOps, or I guess the inverse, like what we do to avert that overcomplication. So some of our strategy there, talking about Coolify, different deployment stuff. Yeah, maybe we'll just watch what we do over the course of the week in terms of coding and make videos about it.
Excellent. Thank you, guys.
All right, see you soon.